students. Here we are. It's our final biology lecture. Remember that this is not in your textbook at all. This is something we added on at the end just to give you a little introduction into the human body and the anatomy and physiology of that. There is an entire year taught course by me, a year course taught by me called a Biology 2 Anatomy and Physiology, and it goes through these in lots of detail. So we will just be skimming the surface here. Other biology classes in ODA didn't spend as much time on the botany section of our book, and therefore they spent, I think, 4 weeks or so on this. So you have a little chunk of papers in the back of your book there after Module 16 that have a bunch of blanks to fill in on this. Here's what I'm going to tell you. You do not need to fill those blanks in, okay? Don't worry about those. Just listen and hear about the cool, creation of our human body. And just take that in. You may need to know some of the information for the final exam, which reminds me, how are we dealing with the final exam? Well, I made a decision that I'm going to put it online and through the Google Classroom thing. So if you haven't actually signed on to Google Classroom, you need to do that first. And then I'm going to send out via that these online deals. And you should be able to take the online test. It's multiple choice. You're just going to click the answer as you right there taking it, right? So you'll take it, and I think you get to go back and look at it before submitting it. So like if you click one answer, you can go back and change it if you want to. 20 questions, each worth 5 points, with one bonus question worth 5, which is a short answer, okay? If you get everything right plus that bonus, you could get a maximum of 105 points, okay? And so that's what I've plan to do. I've got the test ready to go, and I'll explain to you at the end how I'm going to send that out. All right, but let's go ahead and get started on this lecture and do our rat dissection at the end. All right, I have a little message for you. Hey students, here we are. It's going to be our last lab today. Yay! Okay, so we will be getting started pretty soon here on our rat dissection. And it's going to be a lot of fun, okay? So stick to the end, and you'll get to see all the stuff that we've learned about as far as the human body and what's involved in it. Okay, and then I'll talk in a lecture about what's going on with the final and stuff like that. Okay, just wanted to show you my face once. All right, see you soon. All right, there we go. So let's do our little A&P preview. Okay, A&P stands for Anatomy and Physiology. Anatomy is the structure of organs and tissues. What do they look like? What kind of cells are in there? Physiology is how it functions. Okay, how that structure functions, the underlying mechanism. So where anatomy is pretty straightforward, physiology is actually quite complex. There are 11 organ systems in our human body, and typically when you study A&P, you go through the organ systems one at a time. That is how our A&P course is set up in Biology 2. So I actually am teaching Biology 2 next year. I switched that off every other year with marine biology, and A&P, of course, is the very serious. Not that marine biology is not serious. It's more fun, and the A&P is more serious. So if you are interested in any way going into the health fields, all right, so nursing, going to med school, becoming a doctor, physical therapy, these kind of things, sports medicine, all of these type of things would be very, very, it'd be advantageous for you to take A&P sometime in your career, all right? And I feel like our course is pretty good. So what's our 11 organ systems? We have something known as the integumentary system. If you ever took general science with me back in the day, you know that includes your skin, all right? Your skin, your nails, and your hair. We have the skeletal system. You can guess that one, bones. Muscular system are our muscles. Circulatory system is our heart and vessels that pump blood throughout the body. The respiratory system is our system of getting oxygen. The endocrine system is our system of hormones. It turns out the hormone system, along with the nervous system, is running the show, people. We have our digestive system, that is, eating food and getting nutrients. Nervous system is our brain and the tissues that transport that nervous signal to the other parts of our body. Urinary system would be our kidneys. Our lymphatic system, and you can see we're missing one on here, the last one, and we're not going to talk about it today, is the reproductive system. All right, let's start with integumentary. We have our skin, our hair, and our nails. So here is a cross section of a chunk of skin right here. You can see we have, well, two main parts plus the hypodermis. So we have an epidermis, which is the outer layer right here. Okay, we have the dermis, which is pretty thick right here, and then the hypodermis is actually considered part of connective tissue and not necessarily part of the integumentary system, but it's down there below. It's actually got a lot of this is called adipose tissue. That's fat. So we have underlying fat that is for our insulating our body, keeping us warm, that kind of thing. All right, let's start up here with our epidermis. It turns out the epidermis has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers, but they're very thin. And we call those the stratum corneum, the stratum lucidum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum spinosum, and the stratum basale. And those are all, where's that basale pointing? Okay, it's pointing all the way down here. Yeah, okay. So you can see what happens is stratum basale is this one single layer of a type of cell known as a epithelial cell. And epithelial cells will grow right next to each other. So you put them side by side, like Lego bricks, right? You're putting them side by side. And they are constantly going through mitosis and sending up cells upward into the stratum spinosum. So they start in basale, then they move up. And once they've moved up, they're in stratum spinosum. So stratum basale is only one layer thick, one cell layer thick, constant mitosis, constant pushing up. So then the stratum spinosum has several layers, moving to the stratum granulosum. And what happens in stratum granulosum is something interesting. The cells begin to secrete a certain kind of chemical. And that chemical starts to, it's really kind of a waxy material that starts to waterproof the skin. Okay, so our skin is waterproof. And that keratin is what it's called. That keratin is released. When it does that, it actually smothers the cells and it kills them. So in stratum granulosum, I like to say, the suicide begins. As we move up, so we have the stratum lucidum and the stratum corneum. It turns out the stratum lucidum, see that kind of thick thing right there? That's the stratum lucidum. That is really only present in the palms of your hand and the soles of your feet. So you know that skin, you can just feel it, how it's thicker there. Yeah, it's thicker right there. That's because we have an extra layer of epidermis right there. So at stratum lucidum those are all dead cells. And then above them, our stratum corneum can be lots of layers thick. Those are the top layers. That's what you're looking at. That's what you see. If you brush your skin like with your hand, you can see little flakes coming off. That's because all those cells are dead. And they are sloughing off constantly. They're falling off of us because stratum basale is making new cells, pushing it up, pushing it up, pushing it up. And we're constantly getting rid of cells. That, and by the way, is what dust is in your house. Okay, so that's our epidermis. And then we have our dermis. So the dermis, you can see here where the basale is. Notice how it's bumpy right there. We call that an undulating or, wavy area there. It actually dips right down into this area and then back up here. And underneath it, look at that. You see those? Those are blood vessels. It turns out there are no blood vessels in the epidermis at all. Remember, as a little kid, you may have tried to put a needle through your skin, right? And if you go shallow enough, you can stick the needle all the way through without actually, causing bleeding, right? That's because you just stayed in the epidermis. But once you get out of the dermis, we have blood supply. It's important for stratum basale and spinosum, and even to a small extent granulosum, to have blood supply, all right? Because that's where oxygen and nutrients are coming from. And for those cells to be able to grow and move and that kind of thing, they need to have oxygen and nutrients. So that's why we have this undulating area right here. It's kind of cool. They pulled it away right here. See how it's very bumpy right there? That's so that blood vessel can actually reach up into there and get that nutrient up into the avascular epidermis. We call those dermal papillae, and they look like that. It turns out that they're strong enough, if you will, they're bumpy enough that you can look at your hand, take a look at it, and you can see them. They're called fingerprints, right? So the fingerprints you're seeing right here, the ridges that you're looking at, are actually the dermal papillae that are reaching up. And think of the epidermis as sort of a sheet that's been laid over them, and you can see the bumps coming through from below. All right? So that is fingerprints. All right, so what do we have besides our blood vessels? We have all this stuff going on in here, right? So we have hair, which is part of the integumentary system, and also nails. But they're stuck down into our skin in something known as a follicle. We know that from mammals, right? A follicle. Notice the follicle at the end has a little attachment to a blood vessel. It also has an attachment to a nerve. That's why if you go get a haircut, which is harder and harder these days, right? When you go get a haircut and the scissors cut through it, it doesn't hurt because this part of your hair is dead, just like this part of your skin is dead. But down here, if you pull your hair out, that hurts. That's because it's attached to a little nerve ending right there. And that's because this part of your hair down at the bottom is alive. This part of your hair, the shaft, is not alive. Okay. Then we have these other things. We have a sweat pore. Okay, so this is a little pore that basically releases water to the surface of your skin, and it allows us to cool off. Then we have, this is called the Pacinian corpuscle. It's one of our sensors for the sense of touch. We have more than that one, though. We have the Pacinian, we have the Meissner's corpuscle, we have Meissner's right up there. We have free nerve endings. I don't know if we see any of those free nerve endings. Yeah, right here. Okay. And a couple of other things. Notice also around the hair follicle, we have a gland right here called an oil gland or a sebaceous gland that produces oil that keeps our hair healthy. So it's normal for you to have oily hair. That's good. It keeps your hair healthy. All right. And that's down, it's a gland. So we learned about glands too when we talk about anatomy. All right. That's it for the integumentary. Fingernails also are part of that. They grow out in the same way where the end of our fingernail is dead. So we can trim our fingernails without it hurting. But if you get up into the nail bed, that does hurt, right? Okay. All right, the skeletal system. Right there you're looking at a skeleton labeled with some of the more common of the bones. I typically would bring George. George is my little skeleton, and I stand him up and we kind of look at these various bones in there. Okay, so what is bone made from? It's considered connective tissue, connects things, but we have two major bone tissue types. We have the type called spongy bone, which has holes in it. It's not spongy because it's soft and squishy like a sponge. It's called spongy because it has holes in it like a sponge. And then we have compact right here. Very, very compact. It goes around the edges right here of long bones. But on the ends of long bones, we have spongy tissue. And the reason we have that is because this right here is where all of your blood is made. So all of your blood is manufactured in your bones, and specifically in the red marrow of the spongy bone of your long bones. Inside, here's our compact bone. All right. We have marrow in there too. It's called yellow marrow because one of the main jobs for bones is to store stuff, storage. And it's storing fat. And it stores fat in the yellow marrow of your bone. In the compact bone, it's storing things like calcium. All right, so other minerals that we need for strong bones and minerals that we need to get at for other parts of our other systems of our body to run smoothly. And so we'll go get it from the bone. If I need calcium for a certain process, my body will break down bone tissue and release that calcium into my body. If you're not getting enough calcium in your diet, then your body will take it from your bone and make your bone a little weaker. So make sure you get enough calcium. All right, so the bone shape itself, this is a long bone. All right, the longest bone in your body is called the femur. It's in your thigh right here, and it's usually the one we show for the anatomy right here. So we have the epiphysis right here, the diaphysis, and the epiphysis at the other end. Okay, on the end of it we have a covering of cartilage, because bones come up against each other to move, right, to have what we call articulation, which is hinging movement. So we can move our bones. We can have strength, but yet still have movement. And at the end of them, when it touches another bone, it has something softer here called cartilage, and that cartilage keeps bone from rubbing up against bone, which would be actually pretty painful. There are lots and lots of nerve endings in your bone. That's why if you've ever had a broken bone, you know it hurt, right? Yeah, it was very painful. I personally have never had a broken bone, but I understand it hurts. Some of our bones that you might want to know, the skull, it actually has lots and lots of bones in there, but we don't have to worry about naming each one of those. It's also known as the cranium. The top jaw, which is fused to the cranium, is called the maxilla. The bottom jaw, the jaw here, that's not fused, it's only held by a ligament. That's why if you've ever watched a crime show and they come up with a skull, it doesn't have the bottom jaw, right? That's because that falls off, right? That's called the mandible. Your collarbone is known as the clavicle. The scapula is and the back of you, it's your shoulder blade back there, okay? We have our arm right here. The humerus is the upper arm. We have the radius and the ulna. Our wrist is called the carpus, with carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. You can see carpal, metacarpals. It doesn't say it, but metacarpals, phalanges. We have our vertebrae running through here, our cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. Our ribs cage is pretty cool. They're flat bones that are flexible. So when I'm breathing, my chest will move, but my bones will still be there to protect my heart and my lungs. That's another role of bones, is protection. Also to hold on to our muscles, that kind of thing. We have our pelvis. And then, like I said, the femur is the longest bone in the body, which connects to the tibia and fibula, the lower leg. But notice there's something there, the patella, which is the kneecap. Then attaches to the tarsals, the metatarsals, and the phalanges, right down there at the feet. Okay? Those are the main ones. There's more bones. I think there's 206 different bones in our body. But these are sort of the stars of the show, if you will. Oh, this is a fun little video right here. It's gonna. Remember, I told you there's lots of bones in the cranium. This will show it to you. It kind of deconstructs the skull, and you're going to see it has different colors and stuff, which have all been added, of course, by a computer. So you can see all those different colors are different bones. We have the frontal bone, we have the temporal bone, we have the occipital bone, we have the parietal bone. Maybe that's parietal, that's temporal. Here's our mandible, here's our maxilla. And then you're going to see the whole thing's going to come apart here. So there are the big bones. This is zygomaticus. All right, there they come. Look at that. Creepy, huh? Look at the teeth coming out. And all those little bones in there forming our sinuses and things like this. See all those? All those have their own names. Now, even in my Biology 2 class, you don't have to know all those names. Just the big ones like I named earlier. But for this class, you don't need to know them. You just need to know they're there, okay? And be fascinated with this incredible design that we have, that God has made. When they join back together here, those are little joints. They're very stable joints called suture joints. Here you can see, did I say parietal and temporal? I think I might have had those mixed up. And labeled again. Okay, so pretty cool. That's all we need of that right there. So bones move by virtue of joints. Now I mentioned the suture joints in the skull. They don't move anymore, so they're immovable joints. Think about though when a baby is born and they have that soft spot on their head. That's because the joints haven't fused together yet on their skull right there. Okay, it takes a little time. You think, well, why in the world would they leave that? Would God design that to leave that part open? Well, that's so that the skull is flexible, so the baby can come out through the birth canal. So you may have noticed if you've seen a brand new baby or a picture of a newborn, their head's kind of shaped a little bit like a cone, right? It's a little pointy at the top. You think, oh no, they got a weird shaped head. Well, it'll round out because the bone will then settle down and then grow to each other. But the joints that we're most interested in are known as synovial joints. Those are the joints that move, okay? So we're going to see here, this is a typical joint. This is called the ball and socket joint. You see a ball inside a socket. These are the most movable joints we have in our body. We will find those in the hip and in the shoulder. They're very movable. They have a great range of motion, but they are a little bit weak, all right? So they need a lot of support. And the way they get support is through musculature. So think of the muscles that are around your hip, including the gluteus maximus, right? That's helping to keep that hip joint in place. All right, it's kind of cool here. You can see how this, the end of this bone, so here's a femur, right? And here is the pelvis. So the end of this bone is capped with what we call articular cartilage. And this is known as the femoral head. So the head of the femur. This right here, by the way, is called the femoral neck. All right, and then, of course, the femur. The joint capsule is all around here. That is keeping it, not only do we have cartilage to keep a smooth movement here, there's also a fluid inside there called synovial fluid that's being produced by the membranes right here. That produce like a very slippery lubricant. It's sort of like the white of an egg, you know, egg white that's raw. It's kind of real slippery. That keeps these bones from rubbing against each other. Okay, so what happens then, I can move that joint around pretty freely. So think about if you were a high kicker for, you know, the Rockettes, right? You can put that leg way up. I can't do that. All right. But if you're a soccer player or something, you can move that around pretty well. It's much more obvious on your shoulder. You can move that shoulder joint around very easily. Think about a pitcher for baseball, really has to use that shoulder. So that ball and socket joint is very useful for that kind of movement. They're not as strong as some of our other joints, however. For instance, the knee joint is called a hinge. It only goes one way. Also, that your elbow's the same way. So think about that. If you bend your arm out and you bend at the elbow, it comes in, right? But if you can't bend it backwards, no, you can't bend that backwards. What that does for you, gives you a lot of strength with that hinge joint right there. Okay, you get a lot of strength. So I don't need quite as much musculature to support the joint. Think if I had a real muscular elbow, that might look funny, right? Yeah. So it turns out we have a very muscular shoulder. That's called the it's a series of 4 muscles. What's that called? The I can't remember it. Hold on. Okay, I remember. It's called the rotator cuff, and we'll probably get to that when we get to the muscles. Rotator cuff for your shoulder right there. Okay, so some of the other joints real quick. We have a pivot joint and a ellipsoid joint. So the ellipsoid joint is really closely related to the ball and socket. So think about your wrist. That has pretty good movement right there. Pretty good movement. But not as strong as, say, your knee or your elbow. Pivot joint, your head. You can turn your head and say no. All right, okay. All right. Bones have strong attachments. So ligaments attach bone to bone. You can see it right here. Ligaments. All right, ligament. Tendons join muscle to bone. So we'll see that in just a minute. So let's look at the knee. Here's our patella. That's our kneecap right here. Look at that articular cartilage. This is also articular cartilage, this blue stuff right here. So we have these ligaments kind of making an X formation smack in the middle of your knee. That knee is very strong, and it needs to be held together very strongly. All right, and so sometimes if you overuse it and you extend your knee and it gets hyperextended, it bends the wrong way, for instance, or you get an injury, like if you're playing soccer and somebody smashes into, or football and somebody tackles you, you might blow out this ligament, one of these ligaments, and the most susceptible one is the ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament right here. If that gets extended beyond it, so it's like taking a rubber band and stretching it really hard, and if it snaps, that's, first of all, it's very painful, but also trying to get it to heal is difficult because there's not a lot of blood supply either to cartilage or to ligaments. And so it takes a long time for something like that to heal. So if it gets stretched out like that, what doctors will do is actually transplant a different ligament in there. They'll take it from another part in your body that doesn't need so much strength and put it right in there. But there's other ligaments too. We have the posterior, the PCL, the posterior cruciate ligament. There's our ACL. We have the medial collateral, so medial inside. We have the lateral on the side collateral ligament. All of that is serving to hold those bones together. If you've ever tried to take a whole chicken raw and cut it apart, you know how strong it is between those bones. You have to use a sharp knife to cut through there. All right, because you got to cut through this very, very strong tissue, this connective tissue right there. So remember, bones are joined together by ligaments. Muscles are joined to bone by tendons. This is called the gastrocnemius, which is our calf muscle, and it turns into our biggest tendon in our body called the Achilles. On the side, you can see right here, see that red part? That muscle has a lot of blood supply to it. That's why it's red. But at the top, notice how it turns kind of white because that turns into connective tissue. And that connective tissue is the tendon. And so the muscle turns into that. It inserts itself into the bone above the joint. That's important. That's how we get leverage, above the joint. And it goes right into there and actually becomes bone. So it's very strongly attached to the muscle right there. Here, let's come down here. The red muscle now turns very white. No blood supply, right? Because it's a tendon now, but a muscle turned into tendon. They're both considered connective tissue. This connective tissue, these two here, this is muscular tissue. So the muscular tissue turns into connective tissue. It becomes this tendon. Look how it's inserted into a bone beyond that joint to give us our leverage into our heel right there. So this is, look how fat it is. All right. We cannot stand up without that joint, y'all. If you get damage to your Achilles tendon, it's very painful, mostly because it rips into your muscle right here. But also you can't walk on that. You can't. So if you have a damage to that, you need to get some, therapy to get that healed up. Also, they can surgically repair that, but it takes a while for the healing to take place. So take care of your tendons. Our muscular system. We have lots and lots of muscles. If you go into med school, you're going to need to know the name of the muscles. There's over 600 of them. Yikes, right? You know some of them already. You know your biceps, right, in your arm, but it turns out there's biceps elsewhere, okay? So to be really official, you have to say biceps brachii. Brachii means having to do with the arm, okay? We have our triceps behind it. The triceps brachii. That means it's in the arm because we might have triceps somewhere else. Here it is, triceps brachii, right back there. Those two work together. Let's see if I have that picture coming up. I don't. Okay. Maybe I do after that. All right, let's see some other ones. In our face, oh my goodness, the muscles in our face are amazing. Humans have an incredible array of facial expressions, right? I mean, maybe dogs are second to us, yeah? We can make these really cool facial expressions. It all has to do with the musculature in there. Have you heard of your lats? Those are your latissimus dorsi. Those are in your back. They kind of stretch out to the back right here. Have you heard of your trapezius is in your back? It looks like a trapezoid. Our deltoid right here looks a little like a triangle. That's why it's named that, deltoid. So naming the muscles is kind of bizarre. They're named by various things, you know, where they are. So you could say, for instance, quadriceps femoris. Look, it's over the femur. That gives you an idea of where it is right there. Quadriceps, that part of it, has to do with, it's actually 4 muscles that work together. The quadriceps femoris. They each have their own name, by the way. And one of those is the femoris. Okay, so that's just simplifying it right there. Let's see. Our gastrocnemius we saw was our calf muscles. Platysma is beneath your chin. It's actually your frowning muscle. Rectus abdominis. Well, look, abdominis, that tells you something. It tells you it's in the abdomen. Rectus means straight. So these are straight, lined up straight. Linea alba. Linea alba. That means it's in a line, linea. Okay. Alba, that actually means white right there. So we're looking at the white part of the connective tissue right there. Brachioradialis. Let's see. Any other ones? Pectoralis, the pecs, right? Pectoralis major. There's also pectoralis minor because it's smaller. The external obliques, their muscles are going at an oblique angle like that. So it might sound a little overwhelming, but in med school you will have to know the names of those. In nursing school as well. All right, but it's just a matter of memorization, no big deal. But muscular tissue is pretty cool because the cells, we talk about a cell being round. Well, these cells are actually long cells called fibers. And you can see like right here in this picture, that's a fiber which gets wrapped in something, 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 all to give you that muscle right there. So they're all wrapped up, and all those things have names, of course. It always kind of reminds me of sushi or something, right? And then this would be called the belly of the muscle, okay? So making up. So if we're looking at the biceps brachii right there, you see that's the muscle itself. It's made up of all this tissue. Now that tissue is very specialized, okay? So there are 4 types of tissue in our body, and 2 of those types are excitable. That means electricity can affect them. One of those would be nervous tissue, of course, because it's coming from our brain. The other one is muscular tissue. So the muscle tissue gets excited by nervous tissue that hits it and causes it to contract. So this next picture is what we call the sliding filament model. And what happens is that these little things right here, these little proteins will pull on this protein of the muscle and pull it closer together. So if you flex your muscle and make a muscle forming with your arm, what you're doing is you are sliding those past each other. It's called the sliding filament model, and it actually becomes quite complicated. You have something known as actin protein, myosin, and then myosin has 2 other proteins that you have to know the name of there on that for that sliding filament model. Oh, I told you about the muscles in the face. Yikes, look at that. There's so many and they're so cool. Notice some of the names of it. This one's called the temporalis muscle. What's it covering? The temporal bone, which is covering of your brain. You'll find out the temporal lobe of the bone. We have other ones here, right here. Okay, so let's see. I like this one. This is a circular muscle around your eye. So think about winking your eye. That's actually that circle closing around there. That's called the orbicularis oculi. We have one around our mouth called the orbicularis oris. So orbicularis refers to circular, oris refers to mouth, oculi refers to eye. Okay. We have the levitator labii, levitator lift, labii lips. This is how you're going to lift your lips up, okay? And then we have the zygomaticus major, the zygomaticus minor, and the masseter. These, so that the levitator, zygomaticus major, and minor, those work together for smiling, okay? So you use those little muscles right there to smile. Our platysma, I don't think it's not here, is it? The platysma is what a big muscle that, there it is right there, it's peeled away, that it uses for frowning. So it takes a lot more muscle to frown than it does to smile. That's true. So turn that frown upside down, right? Masseter, you can think right there, that masseter is going to work with cheek movement and stuff like that, but it really is helpful for chewing our food. Okay, so masseter, like masticate, means to chew up our food. This one right here, we have something known as the buccinator, and the buccinator along with the orbicularis oris and one other one, not sure which one right here, those are known as the kissing muscles. So if you purse your lips together, okay, the buccinator helps out for the kissing muscles. Let's see. Some of these you'll end up having to know for A and P. If you're a doctor, of course, you have to know them all, especially if you're a doctor who works on facial reconstruction, like plastic surgery and stuff like that. Boy, howdy, you would need to know these. All right, moving on to our circulatory system called the cardiovascular system. Cardio, heart. Vascular would be the tubes being the veins and the arteries in there. And of course, the heart is a pump. It's going to pump blood throughout our body. It's important for our body to have blood supply. Let's see a little video.
Your heart is a pump. It's a muscular organ about the size of your fist and is located slightly left of center in your chest. Your heart is divided into the right and left side. The division protects oxygen-rich blood from mixing with oxygen-poor blood. Together, your heart and blood vessels comprise your cardiovascular system, which circulates blood and oxygen around your body. In fact, your heart pumps about 5 quarts of blood every minute, and it beats about 100,000 times in one day. That's about 35 million times in a year. Oxygen-poor blood, blue blood, returns to the heart after circulating through your body. The right side of the heart, composed of the right atrium and ventricle, collects and pumps the blood to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. The lungs refresh the blood with a new supply of oxygen, making it turn red. Oxygen-rich blood, red blood, then enters the left side of the heart, composed of the left atrium and ventricle, and is pumped through the aorta to the body to supply tissues with oxygen. 4 valves within your heart keep your blood moving the right way. The tricuspid, mitral, pulmonary, and aortic valves work like gates on a fence. They open only one way and only when pushed on. Each valve opens and closes once per heartbeat, or about once every second. A beating heart contracts and relaxes. Contraction is called systole, and relaxing is called diastole. During systole, your ventricles contract, forcing blood into the going to your lungs and body, much like ketchup being forced out of a squeeze bottle. The right ventricle contracts a little bit before the left ventricle does. Your ventricles then relax during diastole and are filled with blood coming from the upper chambers, the left and right atria. Then the cycle starts over again. Your heart is nourished by blood too. Blood vessels called coronary arteries extend over the surface of your heart and branch into smaller capillaries. Here you can see just the network of blood vessels that feed your heart with oxygen-rich blood. Your heart also has electrical wiring, which keeps it beating. Electrical impulses begin high in the right atrium and travel through specialized pathways to the ventricles, delivering the signal to pump. The conduction system keeps your heart beating in a coordinated and normal rhythm, which in turn keeps blood circulating. The continuous exchange of oxygen-rich blood with oxygen-poor blood is what keeps you alive.
All right, so there's our circulatory system. Yeah, and our heart is, of course, its own kind of muscle. It's called cardiac muscle. It's a special kind of tissue. So specialized, if I took a cell off of your heart tissue, it would beat on its own. It's got its own little beat to it. It's crazy stuff. So we can see here that it's sort of angled a little bit toward the left side of your chest. So on the right, this is the left side of the heart. So think of it if you turn around and it's in your body, right? And the right side of your heart over here. So our atria are at the top, right? And there's this kind of little top part some people call the auricle at the top of the atrium. And our ventricles are down here. I want you to look at this aorta. It's this massive artery coming out. Notice it's going to curve down, okay? So it curves. Look, it sends a bunch of blood up to your brain and upper body, curves down to send blood out to the lower part of your body. And then it comes back to your lungs through our vena cava. Here's our superior, meaning top part, vena cava, and our inferior vena cava below. Pulmonary trunk, this is going to the lungs, and right here coming back from the lungs, okay? Pulmonary veins, okay. All right, and you can see the blood vessels on the heart muscle itself. Those are important to keep those clear. If a clot should get in there, it can cut off blood supply to a little bit of your heart muscle right there. That's what is known as myocardial infarction, otherwise known as a heart attack. I think we're going to look at the inside now. Yeah. So you can see we have our ventricles down here and our atria right up here, and then our valves. So you saw in that video how the heart was pumping, right? So think about your muscle. If you constrict your muscle, if you contract your muscle on your arm, is it making a noise? No. So why is our heart going thump 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 thump? That's actually the slapping shut of these valves. When they slap shut, boom 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 boom. And they're just a little bit off from much. Left, right, left, right, left, right. And you can hear that with the stethoscope. All right, so it goes from the top to the bottom, like a baseball game, all right? So we go top, down to the ventricle. So if we're looking at the right side, right atrium, right ventricle, out to the lungs. Comes back from the lungs into the left atrium, left ventricle, out the aorta to the rest of the body. Turns out the muscle on the left side of the heart needs to be thicker than the muscle on the right side because this is pumping all the way to the body. I don't know what this video is. Let's find out. Oh, here it is, our heart.
Ventricular contraction causes the atrioventricular valves to close, which signals the beginning of ventricular systole. The semilunar valves were closed during the previous diastole and remain closed during this period. Continued ventricular contraction increases pressure in the ventricles above the pressure in the aorta and pulmonary trunk, causing the semilunar valves to open. When the ventricles relax and their pressures drop, blood flowing back toward the relaxed ventricles causes the semilunar valves to close, which is the beginning of ventricular diastole. Note that the atrioventricular valves remain closed. When the pressure in the ventricles becomes lower than the pressure in the atria, the atrioventricular valves open and blood flows into the relaxed ventricles. This accounts for most of the ventricular filling. The atria then contract and complete the ventricular filling.
Okay, sorry about the lousy quality of that right there. Okay, uh-oh, another one? All right, still the circulatory, I think.
The circulatory system, consisting of the heart, arteries, capillaries, and veins, is the pumping mechanism that transports blood throughout the body. In the heart, the left ventricle contracts, pushing red blood cells into the aorta, the body's largest artery. From here, blood moves through a series of increasingly smaller arteries until it reaches a capillary, the junction between arteries and veins. Here, oxygen molecules detach from the red blood cells and slip across the capillary wall into body tissue. Now deoxygenated, blood begins its return to the heart. It passes through increasingly larger veins to eventually reach the right atrium. It enters the right ventricle, which pumps it through the pulmonary arteries into the lungs to pick up more oxygen. Oxygenated, blood re-enters the left atrium, moves into the left ventricle, and the blood's journey begins again.
Okay, and also real quick, y'all, when they keep showing deoxygenated blood as being blue, and they even in one video said blue blood, we only refer to it as blue blood to remind us that it's deoxygenated. Blood isn't really blue, okay? It's really kind of a deep magenta purple color when it's deoxygenated. It's bright red when it's oxygenated. So you may look at your arm and see a vein and say, well, it looks blue to me. Well, that's the vein. The vein's blue, okay? If you cut yourself, of course, it's bright red, right? Because it touches the oxygen. So as soon as the blood gets in contact with oxygen, it turns bright red. So by the time, it's never fully depleted of its oxygen, though, 100%. So it gets to the lungs and gets renewed. But we call it blue blood just for our, to keep track of where it is in the system. Okay. Which brings us to the respiratory system. And interestingly, now, first of all, I want to tell you, A&P class, Biology 2, there's lots and lots of dissections of organs. And the organs do not come from humans. They come from usually a sheep or a cow, and because they're very similar to ours, we take a look at those and we dissect them. So lots of dissections. If you like dissections, you'll like A&P. And furthermore, when we look at the physiology underlying those, that tends to be the hard part of the course, the difficult part of the course. And of all the systems that we study, you think the brain might be the most difficult. It turns out the respiratory system is one of the most difficult modules of the whole year, and that has to do because we're doing this gas exchange in order to get oxygen. Remember, we need oxygen to perform metabolism, which produces energy. So the process of going through that's known as the Krebs cycle. We've studied that this year, right? And I think I even warned you, it gets really complex. Well, that's what we study in this, and we get actually to each step of the Krebs cycle. It gets pretty intense. But the respiratory system itself is fabulous. Okay, it is, let me go back real quick. It is made up of, so we're breathing in through our nose and our mouth, into the pharynx, which is the shared passageway between the respiratory system and the digestive system. And then it goes into our trachea, which is also known as the windpipe. And it passes through this little cartilaginous box right here called the voice box, also known as the larynx. Right now I'm talking to you and I'm vibrating air through my voice box, okay? And it's beautiful, right? That it comes through and I can change it. I can make my voice loud or soft or high or low. I can do all that with manipulating my larynx. Pretty cool stuff. Our trachea is a very strong tube that doesn't collapse. It stays open all the time because we need to be breathing all the time. It breaks off into what is known as the brachial tree. Looks like a little tree in here. We have the large ones called the bronchi or bronchi that then break up into smaller and smaller branches called the bronchioles. And those are in our two lungs. So we have two lungs right here, and those lungs operate off of a negative pressure system where our diaphragm is a muscle separating our pleural cavity from our peritoneal cavity, creating a negative pressure in here. So when I move this down, it increases the area inside my chest, which allows air to come in. Pretty cool stuff. And then when it gets to the very, very end of that bronchiole, we end up with this really cool structure called the alveoli. Alveoli, one of them right here is called an alveolus. The whole cluster is called the alveoli. Some people pronounce it alveoli. That sounds like ravioli to me. It's alveoli is the right one. They're very tiny, very, very thin walls to allow for maximum gas exchange. Notice that we see this blood vessel coming over it and covering it. So this one doesn't have the blood vessel on it because it's been taken away so you can see it. And the blood vessels, those capillaries, are covering all around there. Okay? And so we have air coming in and exchanging with into the blood, putting oxygen in the blood, taking CO2 out, and exhaling the CO2 right there. So I would say that the functional unit of the respiratory system is are the alveoli. Okay, so that's an important one right here. Let's see a little video about it. Sorry.
The respiratory system moves air through the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchus to the alveoli where the gas exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs. Nares are the openings to the nose. The nasal cavity is lined with cilia, mucous membranes, and blood capillaries. The air is filtered by cilia, moistened by mucous membranes, and warmed by the blood. Air moves into the pharynx or throat, the common passageway for food and air. Air continues on to the larynx. The epiglottis, a flap of tissue in front of the larynx, closes off the larynx when swallowing to prevent food from entering. The larynx or voice box contains the vocal folds. The trachea or windpipe connects the larynx to the bronchial tree. The cartilage rings of the trachea prevent the trachea from collapsing. Lungs are spongy tissue with alveoli and blood capillaries. Breathing occurs because of the expansion and contraction of the lungs. The bronchi carrying the air subdivide into smaller branches called bronchioles. At the end of each bronchiole are the alveolar sacs. The alveolar sacs are surrounded by blood capillaries and contain millions of single-layer alveoli cells where the gas exchange takes place. Oxygenated air goes from the nose to the pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchus, and alveoli. By the process of diffusion, oxygen in the air moves from the alveoli to the capillaries. Carbon dioxide moves from the capillaries to the alveoli and is exhaled. This process is called respiration.
All right. And that turns out to be the most difficult part of A&P. All right. So next we're going to be looking at our digestive system. It starts at the mouth, goes down through the esophagus into the stomach, small intestine, large intestine. That's called the GI tract. Okay. The GI tract, gastrointestinal tract. But we also have these accessory organs, our liver, our pancreas, our gallbladder. Those are all contributing to the digestion of food. So what is digestion of food? First thing we have to do is break it down, and the next thing we have to do is absorb the nutrients. So it's kind of a two-step process. Digestion, technically the word means breaking it down. So we start the breakdown in our mouth. We have physical breakdown by using our teeth to chew it and make it smaller. That's physical. We have chemical breakdown in our salivary glands. The saliva uses chemicals to break down different parts of our food. There's one salivary juice that breaks down fats, one that breaks down proteins, things like that. And then we swallow it, and we use muscular action to get it down to our stomach through the esophagus. And then our stomach, interestingly, the main job of our stomach is mostly to store the food, to hold on to it till our intestines are ready for it. It can expand and get pretty big. It does churn the food. Okay, so it churns it. It adds acid to it. There's a lot of acid in our stomach. It acidifies the food. It breaks it down chemically some more right there, and then it stores it. All right, then as it starts to push through into the small intestine, it enters the first part called the duodenum or the duodenum. And what's going to happen here is that the absorption will begin. So absorption, so we have digestion as far as breakdown, and now we have absorption in the small intestine. The small intestine is small because of its diameter is small. It's actually very, very long, like 20 feet long. And even longer when you look at if you stretched out all the internal parts of it. And then we have the large intestine, which is only called large because it's got a large diameter, because it is only this big up. That's called the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and then the rectum, where we get rid of all of our waste products. So inside the small intestine, you're going to see, so not only is it 20 feet long itself, inside it's got these folds, and the folds have folds. Boy, howdy, that's really increasing the surface area. So we're going to take a look at one of these tiny folds. These are called villi and microvilli. So we're going to look here at one of the villi. So the villus would be it. And notice, so not only do my curves, more curves, and I get to there, look, even more, called microvilli, really increasing my surface area. And what happens is that surface area, the nutrients come in and are absorbed by our cells. Look at all those mitochondria in there. Remember, they're going to take that and make energy, right? A powerhouse of the cell. And it's going to absorb those nutrients and take. So remember, our body needs oxygen, but it also needs glucose, doesn't it? That's our nutrients. We're going to get it from there. Furthermore, we need things like proteins, which are going to help build tissue in our body. Not necessarily used for respiration, which is making ATP, but used for building tissue, muscle tissue, namely. This blood supply up there, reaching up into these little, undulations to increase surface area. And then notice that green thing right there. That is called a lacteal. A lacteal is part of the lymphatic system, and it takes a lymph fluid, and it actually is helping to digest fats. So we need kind of a special way to digest fats in our body. It turns out fats are very good for you. Don't think they're not. They're very good. All right. Video.
In digestion, Food is changed by the organs into a soluble form to be absorbed by the body. Food in the mouth is mixed with saliva. Saliva begins to dissolve the food as the teeth grind and cut it. Food is forced back into the throat, pharynx, by the tongue. Food in the pharynx stimulates the swallowing reflex. The larynx is pulled upward to meet the epiglottis and seal off the trachea. Food goes from the pharynx to the esophagus. Food moves down the esophagus by peristalsis. The peristaltic wave reaches the esophageal sphincter and food enters the stomach. The unique muscular structure of the stomach breaks up the food into small pieces called chyme. Chyme exits through the pyloric sphincter into the duodenum of the small intestine. The major portion of absorption and digestion occurs in the small intestine. The mucosa secrete enzymes that supplement the digestive enzymes of the pancreas and liver. This completes the chemical process of digestion. The walls are covered with villi where nutrient absorption takes place. The structure of each villus contains a capillary and lacteal to pick up the digested nutrients. The nutrients are now transported by the blood to all the cells of the body. The undigested food reaches the ileocecal valve and enters the large intestine or colon. The colon absorbs water, manufactures vitamins, produces mucus, and forms and expels feces. Mass peristalsis pushes the feces into the rectum, which stimulates the defecation reflex.
All right, there we go. That's digestion. Now, to our nervous system. Of course, that's our brain. Okay, so we have two parts of the nervous system. Oh, goodness, my phone's doing somewhere. Okay, we have two parts of the nervous system, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Okay, and central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is all the nerves coming out to the rest of your body right there. Okay, of course, it is, if you want to see, look at all those nerves coming out, all right? So they all have names for those as well, all right? But we don't have to really go through those names. Our brain looks something like this. It's very convoluted. It's wrinkly. That actually shows that you have a lot of intelligence. Okay, we have all that surface area to process the information that's coming in. So what information is coming in? It turns out the information is what we call sensory information. Okay, so you're getting information from all your senses, and your brain is then processing that and sending a message back. We divide it up into these regions. Now, if you look at a brain, you can't necessarily see these regions. You can kind of see the temporal lobe coming on the side like this, and you can definitely see the cerebellum. Cerebellum is really responsible for balance and things like that. But the rest of these, they all look kind of the same, but we found out they really are sort of divided. We have our frontal lobe, our olfactory lobe, that's for smelling. We have this central sulcus, or some people pronounce it sulcus. We have valleys and hills, right? So the hill is called the gyrus, or gyri, and then the valley is called a sulcus, or sulci. And it's kind of interesting. It turns out that all of our motor reflexes are found in this one gyrus, called the primary or precentral gyrus right here. And then our post-central gyrus is responsible for all the sensory information in our body. It seems kind of interesting that we have so much sensory input into our brain, and there's only that one little part there that's responsible. It goes on both sides of the brain right there. And you may wonder, how do we know that? Well, we have had people who have volunteered to have doctors open up their skull and trace their brain activity while they're still awake. You may have heard of the lady who had brain surgery recently. She was a violinist, and she had a brain tumor that had to be dealt with. And she said, well, what if it wrecks my ability to play my violin? And so they came up with an idea. She was awake in surgery, I'm not kidding y'all, playing her violin while they went in to go get that tumor out. So they knew that they could avoid that section of the brain that was responsible for her ability to play the violin. That's pretty cool stuff. So we've done some pretty neat study of the brain by using live volunteers like that. And mostly it's to help try to figure out problems that we have with the brain. At the back of our brain right here is the occipital lobe. And remember the bone went over there was called the occipital bone, right? Covering the lobe. That lobe is where we translate all of our visual stimuli. So our eyes take in from our eyes in the front, send everything back here to the occipital lobe, and we translate everything that's a visual stimulus. If you look at the inside of the brain, it's really two halves. And right in the middle, there's a hole in here called the ventricles. It's similar to the heart, right? It's just a little slip right in here, and what's being made in there is something called cerebrospinal fluid. And that gets sent all the way around the brain and protects it. This right here is called the corpus callosum, and the corpus callosum is the communication between the two sides of the brain. Okay, so we have gray matter and white matter in our brain. The white matter is for communicating, the gray matter is for intelligence. And so most of our cerebrum, the big part here, is gray matter, and then on the inside we have all this white matter that sends the information from the gray matter to where it needs to go. All right, inside here we have something known as the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So thalamus, hypothalamus, and then the pituitary gland hangs off the end of the hypothalamus. And it's responsible for all of your hormonal things. Our brain stem right here, we have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, and it turns into the spinal cord right here. Okay, now we're ready. I didn't have a video on that one, huh? Okay. The lymphatic system is a system you may not really know much about. Okay, I want you to look over here. See all those little green? Remember I talked about those lacteals in the gut? These look a lot like veins, don't they? But the truth of the matter is, veins, which would be blue and red, right, are taking blood throughout the body, pumped by the heart. Well, lymphatic vessels run right alongside them, but they don't have a pump. They have no pump to get everything moving. And so what do? Large muscle movements actually get your lymphatic system moving. So what is the lymphatic system? Well, it turns out it's really your immune system, okay? Your ability to resist diseases. So what happens is the body takes a little sample of your blood all the time, about 10% of your blood. So your blood seeps out of your, the nutrients seep out of your blood into your tissues, but some of that includes the serum portion of the blood, and that'll actually 10% of that will end up in the lymphatic vessels, and they go through the body and they get checked in little checkpoints called lymph nodes. Okay, so lymph nodes. So the lymph fluid actually comes into the lymph node, and this checks it. All right, it checks it to see is it infected? Does it have too much of a certain chemical? Do I need to produce a reaction to it? So let's talk right now about this viral infection that's going on. You may have heard about the fact that some people who get sick with the disease, this coronavirus, end up recovering from it, and they're making antibodies. Have you heard that? Yeah, and you can go get tested to see if you have antibodies. The antibodies are made right here in your lymph node, okay? So the blood comes in, and that part of the blood, which is the serum part of the blood, comes into the lymph node, and the lymph node says, hey, this is full of this horrible virus. We've got to figure out how to get this virus. It's a foreign invader. We got to get it out of here. And so it starts to reproduce these little white cells in here. So white blood cells are made in the bone, just like the rest of all blood is made in the bone. But they go live inside here. They're called lymphocytes, a special kind of white cell called a lymphocyte, living in here. And when that virus shows up, it attacks it, and it memorizes the surface of that. It's called a surface antigen of that virus, and it says this is foreign. And then that lymphocyte tells the rest of the lymphocytes, start making an antibody to attack anytime you see this surface antigen. We'll attack it and kill it, okay? And that's the beauty of our immune system. And furthermore, it remembers it pretty much forever. That's why if you had chickenpox when you were younger, you're not going to get it again, most likely, because your body, your lymph nodes, your lymphocytes remember it, and they attack if it shows up. Those are called B memory cells. B memory cells, which are a type of lymphocyte, a very specialized one. So our lymph nodes are found all throughout the body, namely in areas of entry to the body, like around our neck and our throat, because, we bring in germs through our mouth and our nose. Right there. We also have it it kind of goes down our neck into our armpits, into our groin area, and then various other locations. But lymph tubules are all through the body, and the nodes are in certain locations where they do this spot checking and things like that. We also have some organs that are part of the immune system, which was the spleen right here, and then those lacteals in the gut. That's part of the lymph system. The appendix in your intestine, in your large intestine, that is part of it. It has a lot of lymph tissue in there. Our tonsils, those have a lot of lymph tissue. All right, those are all things that I named right there. You can actually live without those, but it's better to have them. Some of you may have had your tonsils removed, okay? Some of you may have had your appendix removed. Well, it was probably causing a bad problem, and it was important to get it out. But keep in mind that those things do help the body to run more thoroughly, run well, right? Our endocrine system, it is the system of hormones, all right? You may think you know about hormones, but there's actually tons and tons of them, not just the sex hormones. The sex hormones, of course, come from the sex organs, and those are what make us male and female. But we also have an important hormone that comes from our pancreas, for instance, called insulin. And insulin is super important to get glucose into our cells. We have our adrenal glands right here, which produce adrenaline, which will help us to get through stressful situations. It's called the fight or flight response. We have our thyroid, which really actually takes care of all of our metabolism. It keeps our systems running smoothly. If we didn't have it, we'd be in big trouble. Our thymus is for educating our T cells, which are lymphocytes, called T lymphocytes, T for thymus. They go through what's known as a thymic education, which is how they're able to also make antibodies in a kind of a different form, oversimplifying a little bit. We have our hypothalamus, our pituitary, and something called the pineal or pineal gland, which is kind of poorly understood. The pineal gland right there, it has something to do with sleep and awake type of things. But what is it? What are each one of these doing? Each one of these glands are releasing a chemical into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream will carry it to a target cell. Okay, so here's our secretion happening in, let's say, our thyroid gland is releasing something called thyroxine, and it's going to go affect our cells. This cell has a receptor for it, therefore this cell will respond to whatever it's telling it to do, which in that case might be to increase a heart rate or something like that, or decrease a heart rate. These have no receptors, so they're not a target cell. They don't receive the information from that. Our energy balance right here, we can see through all this. These are all hormones. So stress hormone would be adrenaline. We have ghrelin from our stomach, which is a hormone. Insulin from our pancreas, also something known as leptin. All of those influence our brain, and we end up with balance. We call that homeostasis. Homeostasis. And our lymphatic system is our endocrine system is very important there. Urinary system is one of my favorite systems. The kidneys are super cool. You can see we have two of them. They are situated in your back, right back here. They're snugly put in place, covered with fat. Even skinny people have fat covering around their kidney right there. And they have the adrenal gland on top of them, each one right there. But look, they have giant blood supply going into it. What's the job of the kidneys? To filter the blood to get all of the impurities out. Whatever we're not going to use in our body, we're going to make into urine. Okay, they go into our kidneys, through the ureter, into the bladder, and then out of the body through the urethra. All of our blood is filtered through both of these kidneys. Turns out you can survive with just one kidney. Two is better, of course. So here's what it looks like on the inside. This is called the cortex and the medulla. Medulla meaning middle. Medulla. Cortex, capsule around it. It's got these little things called pyramids, renal pyramids. When you see the word renal, that has to do with kidney. The renal pyramids are kind of like little funnels. So we have this blood supply right here. We'll get to that in just a minute. And it filters, and like a funnel, the fluid, the liquid that's going to be collected here in the renal, not the pyramid, but the calyx right here. More funnels, see, more funnels. And into the ureter down to the bladder right there, okay? How does all that happen? Well, it goes through all these tiny, like millions, you can't see them, they're so small, millions of these little tiny filters called nephrons. So the blood comes in, it slams against the wall of it's called the Bowman's capsule. Notice the blood doesn't go into it, it just comes next to it. So the water and the impurities go out of the blood vessel into the tubule called the nephron. All right, and then the blood goes right back and collects some of that water and the stuff we do want, but it gets rid of the stuff we don't want. Notice it's got it's called the proximal convoluted tubule, down into this loop called the loop of Henle, and then up to the distal convoluted tubule and out through the collecting duct. Okay, so the blood supply will reabsorb everything that it wants in the body and get rid of everything it doesn't want in the body through a complex kind of deal. Plus, the kidney is also making a hormone, or two important ones, probably more. Oh, look what we got to now, y'all. So that's all of our systems that we're covering. And now we're going to do our rat dissection, okay? So just sit back, relax. You should be able to see all the things you need to see. Here. Our little guy here. And you can see it's a white lab rat. Okay, so hello, yeah, there she is. Okay, so we're not really studying rats per se, but we are studying mammalian systems, and this is a little mammal. And so what we're going to do is just, we're not going to worry too much about his external anatomy. All right, his little tongue is sticking out right there. Okay, so we're just going to look at the internal anatomy today. All right, so we're going to place our rat like this on her back, his or her back, right? You can tell if it's a male or female based on the genitalia, and this one is a female. It also looks like, see that red stuff there? Probably this one's been injected with some, there's some blue, some stuff to show off the veins and the arteries. I typically don't like those because it makes usually a mess, but we'll see how it does here. Okay, so we're going to start by cutting right up here and making an incision as if we were going into surgery. Our nice sharp knife right down the middle there. Okay, and you should be able to cut through the skin and then through the muscle. It's a pretty thin muscle down here for rats. Okay, all right, and you can see I'm starting to expose some internal anatomy right here. Sorry about my hands getting in the way now and then. I'll try to make sure and move them out before I finish looking at a particular area. Okay, so what the idea is when we have a dissection is to have this exposure, right? We want to be able to see stuff. So we're going to try to open a big window right here. So I'm going to make a slit here, and that'll open this way and this way. Looks like I may have just cut through. No, it's just muscle, I guess. All right, so that's open there, and then we're going to get to the top right here and do the same thing, okay? So right now what I've hit is the rib cage, the breastbone right here, and the knife seems to be going through it pretty easily. Sometimes we'll pull out scissors at this point. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second for you to look at it. Also, I'm going to pause this real quick and just I'm just going to dump out this liquid that's in here, okay? So let me do that and I'll be right back. Okay. Much better. I get a lot better exposure right here. So I'm just going to bring this up to take a look at a lot of the stuff that's in here. Okay, so we can see lots of stuff. One thing that's really cool, see this right here? That, I cut through it, unfortunately, when I was slicing it up. But that is the diaphragm muscle right there, the diaphragmatic muscle, separating the peritoneal cavity from the pleural cavity. So in the pleural cavity, you can see right here, those are the lungs. We'll get those out in a minute. That's the heart. This big thing is the liver. We have all the guts in here. We're going to get into this, the stomach. Yeah, I think so. This turns out to be a female, and those are babies. Okay, it's a pregnant female. All right, so we're going to get to each one of these. We're going to end up taking all of this stuff out. So I'm going to start with the peritoneal cavity, which means the abdominal cavity. These right here are little fat bodies. They're just in there kind of stabilizing the organs. All right. I guess she was a pretty fat little rat here. Okay, so first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is take out the uterus. Okay, so this is the female with the uterus. Keep in mind this creature was bred for scientific use. Okay, so here's the uterus. So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 little babies in there, and we'll get to this in just a minute, okay? Let's see what else we've got here. Okay, so that was all kind of being pushed out of place, all the rest of the organs here. So we're going to see here, okay, that is part of the gut that I was looking at earlier, because the stomach, if you can see, very stomach-shaped right there. And then this big thing, of course, is the liver. Notice how the liver has the blue stuff on it. That is that injected latex to show that there's a lot of vessels there. And so it's okay. It doesn't look like it's made too big of a mess here. So I'm just going to remove. So right here what I'm doing is the end of the digestive system, of course, is going to be where it ends up at the anus. So I'm just going to cut that right there. Okay, that's the very bottom of the colon there. And I'm going to gently kind of try to pull these organs out. You can't see it from where you are, but I just found a kidney and a second kidney right there, which I'll show you in a minute. I'm going to leave those in, okay? I want you to see where those are. All right, and this is actually coming out pretty nicely. I'm going to show you everything. So this is everything. This is upside down. This is the way you saw it. Here's where I cut, right there. We're going to see part of the gut. We'll get to that in just a minute. So I'm going to dump a little of this fluid out again. And I'm going to show you, can you see? I hope you can see that. See those two kidneys? Look how beautiful. They're just sitting, and look at the fat around them, okay? Sitting up against the back of the wall right there of the peritoneal cavity. So I can take them out. They look like little kidney beans, right? Take the second one out. Right there. Okay. So now you can see I've got a cleared out peritoneal cavity right there. So we'll just move her aside a little bit, and let's take a look at the digestive system. Now, we know the liver has a lot of jobs to do, okay? And so it is part of digestion as well. So let's cut the liver away from the rest. All right, so that's what it looks like. Now, often I can find that gallbladder in here somewhere, but sometimes the preservative tends to wreck that. Sometimes it just looks like a little indentation on the liver. So see all the lobes of the liver right there. Am I showing you? I hope I'm not out of screen. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I'm not seeing, unless this is it, that might be it right there, the gallbladder. So remember the liver is making bile to help digest fats, and then it's stored in the little gallbladder right there, which that might be it. Not exactly sure. It's hard to tell. Okay, so there's our liver. Here comes this is the spleen right here. All right, kind of smooth like that. All right, and we have, let's see if I can find the pancreas real quick. Sometimes those are hard to find as well. Rats have them, so I know it's here somewhere. That looks like part of the gut. Oh, there we go. Right there. Right there. Okay, so the spleen and then the pancreas. Unless that's a little part of the liver again. Yeah. Well, maybe that pancreas will show up. This one, it came out separately, but it feels and looks a lot like the liver. A pancreas usually is kind of like a little balloon type of a structure. Okay, so digging through the guts here. So let's go ahead and open up the stomach. Maybe this is it, y'all. Look on this side. It's not because it was completely separate. That must be it. Okay, let's call that our pancreas, okay? It would be close to the stomach like that because the pancreas is going to release enzymes into the small intestine. All right, so I'm going to cut open the stomach and see if we've got anything inside. If maybe she had a little last meal before. Come into the... Oh, yeah, it just looks like some gooey feed. Just some feed. Sometimes they feed them bigger things. All right, so if we cut open the guts, you can imagine what we find in there. All right, so we're not going to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our uterus right here. We'll cut this and see if we can find what's inside here. All right. I sure hope you can see that. I don't know if it's going to be in focus for you. Do you see that little baby right there, y'all? Here's our little baby rat right there. There's the head. The eyes. There's a little arm. Let's move it down just in case. See the little arm right there? Little eye right there. Okay, so there we go. There's our babies. All right, remember this was bred for this reason right here, y'all. Okay, so I know I have a huge respect for life, and it makes me sad on a certain level, but it is for our educational purposes. That we're learning about the reproductive tract right here of the rat. Here's the digestive tract. We have our liver that's digestive and other things, right? Our pancreas, which we'll look at, has something to do with the endocrine system, right? All right, so let's get up into the pleural cavity then. So here you can see we have the rib cage. Okay, so I've cut through the sternum, which is the breastbone, and I'll move away some of these little membranes right here, and you're going to see behind here this pink thing. It's really pink because of the latex that's been injected in there. That's the heart, and I'll get it out in just a minute. And then we'll also get these lungs out, okay? Surprisingly small, these lungs. All right, there's our diaphragm right there. Very strong muscle. Remember, that's keeping the pleural cavity separated from the peritoneal cavity so that we can have the right amount of negative pressure for the lungs to operate properly. All right, so I'm going to come up underneath these lungs and try to get this whole group of organs out, okay, without damaging too much. So I'd like to show you what they look like. So I'm cutting through at the top. It would be the aorta and then the trachea as well, along with those vessels like the pulmonary arteries and veins. All right. Oh, wow, that's cool. Check it out. As I pulled it, some of those giant vessels came with it. Okay, so here we go. There's the trachea, all right? It's the windpipe coming into the lungs. So let's see if we can see the lobes of the lungs. See those? Oh, beautiful. And if you were here, I'd have you feel it and squeeze it. It's sort of like a little sponge. Okay, we should have 2 lobes on this side. Yep, there's a second lobe there. Okay, 1, 2, and then 3 on this side. Accommodating for the heart, of course. Okay, so here's our heart. It is a 4-chambered heart. And you can see right here at the top. So we have the ventricles on the bottom and the atria on the top, and the auricles, which are part of the atria, they kind of stick off the top like a little extra space there. All right, so I'm going to cut the lungs apart from the heart, away from the heart. And I'm going to see if I can cut this heart open. Sometimes we can see the chambers in the heart, sometimes we can't, because it's quite small. And you might be surprised at how small the chambers are, actually. But remember, they're pumping the whole totality of the blood supply through the body. Okay. So there's the heart. You can see it looks just like a heart, doesn't it? All right. And our big vessels coming out here. Right there. Here's the top. Okay, so I'm going to cut it open this way to see if we can see those. I'll bring it back up to you. I hope that was, I'll put it a little lower in case it was out of focus or if I was out of view. Okay. Here we go. I can't see the camera while I'm doing this. All right. It's very meaty. This, by the way, would be called an organ meat if people eat organ meats. They're supposed to be good for you. All right, so you can definitely see the ventricles here. Okay, there's a little blood in there, clotted blood. See if I can get that out. Forgive my use of this up off the tray, but I want you to be able to see. Yeah, that's just clotted blood inside that chamber. So that chamber's pretty nice size, isn't it? So you can see the ventricle, and this is actually another ventricle, and our auricles, our atria, are up here and not quite as visible because they're much smaller. But this is ventricle on the bottom part of the heart right there. Okay, so that's the majority of the internal organs of everything we see. Now, I do not try to get the brain out. It turns out their bone on their head is very, very strong, and the brain is very small. And so while I've had students in the past who have attempted that and actually succeeded at that, it's not necessary to see it. I guarantee you there's a brain in there. Okay, gang, I hope you enjoyed this dissection. If we were together, it would have taken us longer. We would have taken each of these parts separately, okay, and looked at them. All right. I'll be back with you in a minute. Okay, how'd you like that, gang? All right. So here's what we're going to do. Like I told you about that final exam, it's going to be online, right? We're just going to go in there and click your answers. Hopefully that all works and you can get it and everything. And like I said, if you've not signed up for Google Classroom, do that. It's going from modules 8 to 16. Multiple choice, extra credit. I will be sending today this video along with corrected quizzes. Not your corrected quizzes, but keys, quiz keys. Okay, everybody, so you'll do great. No worries about that thing. Then I'll try real hard to get those grades out as quickly as I can. This has been a trying time to end our semester this way. But it was sure great, having our time that we did have together. I'm sorry we couldn't end together. So I miss you. I wish we'd been together, and I wish you all a very happy summer, and hopefully I'll get to see you next year for another class or something like that. Okay. All right. I love y'all, and I will hopefully see you soon. God bless. Bye.